and CIS webinar series, episode 10. We made it 10 episodes in. We're joined by Marty Godsey this week. So I'm your host, Zach, co-founder to Senteon, and unfortunately, I am not joined by my co-host, Rich McGraw from CIS. He is out sailing the Atlantic with some of his friends. So as you can imagine, he did not want to make this webinar episode. But we're very lucky to have Marty with us today. Marty comes with a seasoned background. I think he said over 30 years experience in the IT security space. You're an entrepreneur yourself, product board to Senteon, huge champion and friend. Have had a great time getting to know you. And you'll have an interesting point of view this week as you actually service and work with MSPs. So I'm excited to hear more about what that means. But before we get into today's topic, Marty, do you mind just introducing more about yourself and maybe how you got into the cybersecurity field?
Yeah, definitely, Zach. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and looking forward to not only being here and seeing how I can help people, but also too just being a part of Senteon's product. So, no, it's true. I mean, I'm 30 years. I started back in 1993. I was 17 years old, and people say, "Well, how can you be in this industry at 17?" It's like, well, as a junior in high school, I was working for a local computer store. Instead of flipping burgers at McDonald's like all my friends or something like that, I was out putting in Novell NetWare and Windows.311 and running Token Ring and actually in the industry and working. And then, of course, during the summer, 50, 60 hours a week. So it's been enjoyable. 30 years, I've seen this industry really grow, morph. I've seen where we came from and where we are, and kind of afraid to where we're going in a way. When you look at AI, it kind of scares me a little bit, but I can see the benefit of it. But no, so that's a little bit how I came through. Joined the military after that. Did the same thing, data center operations, and just went off from there and enjoyed it. And in fact, I didn't even want to be a network engineer, an engineer. I wanted to actually be a chef or an archaeologist. And
Really?
Life threw me this curveball, and this is what I have been. But no, I have been, as you mentioned, service MSPs. I was an MSP myself. Still kind of one now. I actually more partner with MSPs than being one myself. But no, my first business that I started was in 2003.
You've been an entrepreneur for a while.
For a little while, yeah. I started an MSP back when being an MSP wasn't cool. You've heard the old country song. And back at early days of the RMMs, back whenever being an MSP was really delegated to those larger companies. You had Tata and you had IBM Global Services and you had those companies, but to the small SMB, they really didn't have an option. It was just really your break fix options and your break fix shops, and then you had the RMMs come out. You had Kaseya, you had Enable, and a few others back then that really gave that 1, 2, or 5 person shop that ability to kind of pick their game up a little bit and be able to support some of their clients without having to go on site and without having to deploy a tech and roll a truck every time. So that's when I started my first MSP, and we did well. My business partner and I did well, but we parted ways in 2009 just because I wanted to take the company left. He wanted to take it right. 2007, 2008, that time frame, the cloud was getting really, really big. Yep. And I wanted to do more cloud technologies. I was like, this is the future. This is where we need to go. And he just didn't trust it. So we parted ways. And, from that point on, I kind of went to work with different companies across the country. I was director of IT for a lot of different companies. Worked for a company where I was director of IT for a DoD contractor. So that's really kind of the beginning to where I got my real security mindset. I mean, I've always had a security mindset. Our tenets here at Rudio are, secure and accessible and then performance in that order. Because if something is not, secure to be able to be protected, then who cares if it's accessible or who cares how performant it is? It's compromised. Your data is going to get out there, and it's just going to be a bad day all around. So then
I got to pause you there, though, Rudy. Secure, accessible, and then performance. I imagine you might get some pushback when you present that to some of your clients or prospective clients. I mean, do they understand those 3 words? Do they push back, or what's your experience?
Some do and some don't. And the ones that do, it's a very simple explanation when I tell them, like, well, first and foremost, security should be in the very front of your mind. It doesn't, it doesn't matter what it is, it should be secure, it should be protected. That's your company asset, your company data. And then when they talk about performance and accessibility, I'm like, well, okay, well, I can have the highest performing file server that EMC can give me, but if I can't get to it, then what's it matter? It's not accessible. So that's why accessibility is number two. It has to be accessible. It has to be able to be reliable and be there. And just because it pings doesn't mean it's accessible, you know? And so, and then from that is performance. It still has to meet performance. But that's, you know, when I get that pushback, that's what you know, it's kind of the little example I give is, you know, I can have the fastest drag car setting out in my driveway, but if I can't get to the track to race
get in it.
then what? Great, you know. So, and that's why I think there's been that shift in a lot of people's minds, and that's where we're a little different than a lot of people. Is, you know, we look at things in a standpoint of, you know, you see the triangle. I think it's what price, performance, and reliability. Choose two, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's here we try to do. You know, you can have all three. If you can have all three, if you have the proper mindset going into whenever you're building an environment. So, you know, with that, you know, kind of when I went to work for the company that we were a DoD contractor, you know, this was in the, oh gosh, probably 2013, 14 time era, 15, somewhere in there, you know, and that was when, you know, CMMC was in its very early stages. You know, back then, you know, they said, oh, we're going to implement it. It's going to be implemented here. And then they pushed it off. And you really didn't have a lot of the, you know, like the 3CPAO certifications now. You didn't have any of that. You really had, I'm CMMC ready. That was the best I could get, was CMC ready. And so it's, you know, at that point, it's like, you know, this is number one, it's always been serious, but now it's really serious. We need to take, you know, action here, and we need to protect our data. Absolutely. So that's real brief how, you know, we kind of changed our focus and put that in place. And when it comes to Rudio, and I'll finish this, is I was director of data center operations and support for a company, an online storage company, or an online. They create an OS, a storage OS, and you know, I wanted to work for myself again. You know, I got another 20 years left in me. Didn't want to work for the man. I wanted to be the man. And so I started.
We all
exactly. We all do. So I started Rudio about a little over a year and a half ago. So we're new as a company, but we're not new from an experience standpoint. Second company, just new in name. And from its inception, that's what we wanted to concentrate on, was providing that consultation, that engineering services to MSPs, because there's a lot of MSPs out there that A, don't know, or B, don't have the time, or B or C, don't have both either. They don't have the time to learn. And then there's a lot of things that they need to adhere by that they may not know the best way to implement it. And so that's really what Rudio came from. In fact, the name of the company is eRudio, ERUDIO, but we do DBA as Rudio. And Rudio in Latin actually means to teach. And so that's one of the principles. We like to teach people. We like to help people learn. And we want people to learn. You know, obviously we want them kind of the whole, you know, you can give a man a fish, or you can teach him to fish, and he fishes forever. We still want them to come back to us to help fish, but we also want them to know how to fish, you know, because ultimately they're the frontline people to their customers. They need to take care of it, and, you know, to help them grow.
Yeah, and I mean, you're coming on to this webinar series, which again, the main focus is to help educate and understand all 500 of these CIS benchmarks. And and you know, we're not paying you to be here, are we, Rudy? Are we, Marty?
No, not at all.
Wish we were. That'd be nice, right?
Not even in cheeseburgers.
Not even in cheeseburgers, not yet. But no, it's an interesting business model, because if I'm understanding correctly, you're servicing MSPs. So you're almost, you know, up a chain to the majority of guests that I have on the show. So I imagine you hear about a lot of the challenges that they're facing and understand how to help them. Could you just kind of talk for a few minutes on the trends you're seeing for challenges for MSPs starting to service security solutions?
Sure, definitely. The biggest trend, honestly, is of course, things are getting more strict. You know, you got your different CIS controls out there. You have HIPAA. People are doing more with HIPAA. Then you have your DoD and CMMC and your PCI, all your different compliances. And the trend that I'm seeing a lot with MSPs out there is the fact that they know how to secure a network. Okay, so hey, I can put in a firewall. I can make it secure. To me, it's secure. It's safe. Okay, it may be, But then when they get that call from the insurance company for one of their customers, and all of a sudden this insurance company gives them a document that has 500 questions on it. And they look through these 500 questions, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I do this or not, or I don't have time to do all this, or, excuse, and I say excuse, but just, the challenges that they run into really comes into making sure it's being done. And that's the biggest challenge I've seen so far from a trending standpoint is they have secured this environment for 10 years. It's been a customer they've had for 10 years. They've never had an issue, but then these new regulations that are coming down, and then not only are saying, are you doing X, Y, Z? They want proof that they're doing X, Y, Z. And knowing how to get that proof or knowing if we're doing it. So the trend really is it's getting more restrictive. I'm finding a lot of MSPs are really struggling with being able to keep up with the changes that are coming and the changes that have been, and more stuff that, I have a year to finish this out, or this customer has, they're going to have to find another provider. And so these are small shops. Typically most MSPs are small shops, 2 to 10, 2 to 15
Absolutely.
people typically. And when you're running, like this every day, and then all of a sudden you get this big questionnaire that comes in, and it's having that time or being able to accommodate that. And to not only accommodate it too, it's also asking questions about your own business. Because these, great, you're a provider. For example, if, HIPAA, you're providing HIPAA, compliancy work, or you have a dermatology clinic, whatever the case may be that you're servicing. Well, when you look through those CIS controls, as you guys know, there at Senteon, they're also asking questions about me as a provider. Do I have these things in place? Do I have this? Do I have access to this? If I have access to this, how do I control access to it? And so it's really the trend I see is these smaller MSPs trying to conform to something that's much larger than they are and what they've had to typically deal with.
Yeah, no, that makes exact sense and is in line with what I've been seeing, because at Senteon, we do service a lot of those 2, 5, 6-man shops, right? I mean, we have plenty of partners who are one-man shops. So very much agree, and they are being pushed that direction to follow the greater needs, right? And I heard you say maybe their customers come and say, hey, we need this compliance a year from now. I feel like a lot of our partners would be shocked to hear they have a year to work on a project. I feel like a lot of the time they're getting hit, hey, I'm supposed to be SOC 2 in the next month. It's like, don't think that's going to be possible.
And cost too. It's expensive to do this. When you start looking at the different controls you have to implement, as an MSP, maybe I have an RMM and I have, an antivirus and I have something else. Okay, that's great. But now you got EDR, MDR, you have, network access control, you got NAC, you have inbound, outbound filtering, you have IDS, IPS, you have all these, you have, the scans from a vulnerability standpoint, vulnerability scans as well as remediation, their remediation plans. So you have all of these processes and all of these things you now have to report on that you didn't have before. So that causes the MSP to now have to go out. Now I got to find a tool that does this. How much does it cost me? Well, that raises my price. How much does this cost me? Well, that costs this. So as they keep adding this, all of a sudden their price keeps going up. Well, that has to reflect to the customers like, hey, my cost has 3x. I'm going to have to raise my prices. And now they have the whole battle that's completely separate from security or anything like that is you're raising my prices. Now you're too expensive and I need to find someone less expensive.
Yep. So and with that more software, which I talk to a lot of my partners, they will have, 60 plus providers that they can choose from to make their stack. And that's not uncommon. If you are a security service provider, you need an assortment of options, right? And that of course comes with a higher price point. One story that I've heard MSPs working out to do that has been successful is they'll show their security stack from 2018, right? They'll show every solution that they had in their 2018, show it was this price point, and then they'll show, here's my stack today. This is everything that we work with and choose from. And obviously going from 5 security solutions to maybe 30 in a certain client, it's going to add labor and that price point you talked about. So showing and being transparent from MSP to their end clients, I've heard stories of being super successful. Would you agree with that?
I have, yes, I'd agree with that. Because it's all about being transparent. I'm a different type of business guy, and what I'm getting ready to say, has it helped me or has it hurt me? It's both. It's done both, and we're a no compromise company. We go in and myself and my business partner and the guys that work for me, if you add up, all of our experience that we have in this industry, we have well over, into what you put in there, well over half a decade worth of experience in this industry. When I first read that, I was like, man, he makes me sound like I'm like 70 years old or 80 years old.
Came in looking good for 50 years experience.
I know, right? I got a little white here, but I'm not, But no, you really, you kind of have to, when I say no compromise is, our goal is to protect our customer, be it an MSP or be it help either a client, the few clients we do direct, or the vast majority of MSPs, helping them to protect their customers. And at the end of the day, the only way you can guarantee that performance is through control and no compromise. This is how it is. This is what you need to do. This is how you need to protect us. Oh, well, it causes me to have to enter my password twice. Well, I understand. I'm sorry. And has that helped me in business? It has, because some people respect that. Has it hurt me? Absolutely it has, because we just don't compromise. Hey, this is how we do business. This is how we charge. And if you're like, well, you're just too expensive, that's too much, I just say thank you for the opportunity and move on. But by that transparency, what you're going there, hinting to there, Zach, that transparency I think is very, very important, because one of the biggest challenges as an MSP that you face is, what are you doing for me? I'm paying you, X number of dollars per month. I'm paying you, $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month, or whatever the case may be. And I never see you. You're never here. But then again, too, everything's working. Nothing's having issues. So, but to go, well, everything is working fine. That's the difficult thing. That's an age-old issue all MSPs have is being able to show that and show the work they're doing. But the transparency comes into the pricing too. It's like, hey, I got to raise your prices, and here's why. Because 3 years ago they were this, now they're this. I have to make money too, and that's another big important tenet of us too. Of Rudio is, whenever we work with anybody, an MSP or client, anybody, it has to be a win-win-win situation. Everybody has to win, or it's not a good relationship, because if someone is not winning in any relationship, it just causes them to be unhappy with the relationship, which causes stress and frustration and tension, and no one wants that. I want to go out and have a beer with my clients. I don't want to go out and have to go to their, to the boardroom and explain this or that.
Only see them when something's wrong. That's not the relationship.
Not at all. Not at all.
No, that's an awesome introduction, and thanks for being so transparent on the things you care about with eRudio. So, diving into this week's topic, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Network Client and Microsoft Network Server. So we have about only 9 configurations, I think, to talk about today. So before we get into it, I'll ask you the general question. Could you tell us what a Microsoft Network Client is? Go for it.
Sure. Well, it's the Microsoft Network Client, to kind of boil it down, is really just an SMB client. Server messaging block used to be called the old CIFS. Computer Internet File System, I think it was, is what CIF stands for. And
I swear, every guest this week knows all the acronyms they use, and it blows my mind.
It's really funny you mentioned that. One of my earliest jobs I got out of the military in this industry was for a company that did bill pay processing, or bill payments for banks. And during my interview, he's asking me questions, and I'm answering them, and I'm coming up with the acronyms, and then I'm saying what the acronym stands for in this. And he kind of paused, and he says, "You're really good on your acronyms, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Dude, I was in the military. Acronyms are life. I mean, we have acronyms for everything." And but no, so with Microsoft Windows Client, it's really for the file sharing. You got some other stuff from a domain standpoint, but for the most part, it's your SMB file sharing in different versions. But and that's what the networking client would be.
And we'll be getting into this. Well, we can just head over to this next slide right away. Focusing on some of those MITRE attack tactics. If we can pop that slide up. What you just said, it has to do with file sharing, communication, signing, and so forth. All of those highlighted words you just said sound pretty valuable to the wrong person. So could you kind of talk about, maybe call out some of these MITRE attack tactics and what the risk is of having a poorly configured Microsoft Network Client?
Sure. If we think back a little bit from a few years ago about data being moved or encrypted, you got the Heartbleed attack and the different ones that came through. A lot of these, you're looking at the, execution, persistence, defense evasion, credential access, and lateral movement. So let's talk a little about each one, like lateral movement. The one thing about any type of compromise or any type of attack that comes in is, the goal of that bad actor is not to just get to one spot. They want to, they don't want to go to where they're wanting to go to, because that's where they're wanting to go to. And if that's the only place that they go, then they can be detected there. And if you stop access to there, then you've now kind of foiled their plans, right? So that lateral movement's very, very important to a bad actor. I want to go here, but before I go here, I want to go here, here, and here first, and then come this direction. And one reason for that is it kind of goes back into the defense evasion. Okay, if I'm a server and I'm sitting here, if I see a connection coming from an unknown location, well, you know what? I can block that pretty easy. I don't know who you are. I'm going to block you. But if a particular attack vector is coming from a known good or a known location, well, then the safeguards in place are far less, because it's a known location. So that's when you start getting into more of the zero trust networking architecture and things like that. But that lateral movement goes hand in hand with the defense evasion of what you have here. Same thing when it comes to the persistence and credential access. Again, why would I want to try to force my way to get your password or do a brute force attack whenever I can compromise an already known and trusted source? I don't have to worry about credential access. I got the credential access right there. And then from a persistence and execution, again, it all boils down to I'm coming from a known safe, a known location. Yep. And so I don't have to worry about all these attack vectors. So, how do you, mitigate this? Well, that's where of these various settings that I know we're going to talk about today, and other settings too that you can, and other softwares as well. Senteon is one, and a few others that's in my stack. I just looked at my stack, by the way. I was curious. Yeah, our full security stack that we deploy to our customers and the ones we recommend to our MSPs are 10 tools. There's 10 things that they're actually in place, and they all do different things. Yep. A little bit of overlap on a few of them, but not many. But they primarily do various different things. And but the mitigating the mirror attack here, all of that kind of plays into it. And really, in my mind, it all comes down into that lateral movement, and understanding and knowing where that bad actor is and going is going to be important. And then defend, and then everything trickles down from there.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it spot on. I mean, all of these, for that bad actor to get in, I mean, if they don't have to do any of the signing or prove anything, it just makes it ridiculously easy for them to get access right on in there. So thanks for the deep dive and overview on those. So let's dive into some of these settings as we're talking about it. So as a reminder to everyone in the audience, we are talking about the CIS benchmarks today. So Senteon is a tool to help implement all of these, and the CIS benchmarks are effectively a set of guidelines to help secure, whether it's an OS. I know they have some recommendations for browsers, SharePoint, and a dozen other things. But we are talking on Windows workstations and server settings during this webinar series. That will expand as we continue to grow. And CIS does have an ample amount of free resources, as well as Senteon. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show a little bit about what that is. Let me get that. Boom, boom. And if you can get my screen up for sharing, moderator in the background. So some heads up, this is going to be the settings that we're talking about today. So we have the Microsoft Network Client settings, and you will note, although we are talking about the CIS benchmarks, these do cross-map across plenty of other frameworks. I know Marty was talking about HIPAA, right? These do map over to HIPAA, CMMC, and so forth. And if you wanted to see the free resources that CIS shares, they do have a deep dive PDF document available for download, or you can sign up for Senteon and see that same data here. So they have the description, the rationale, and their version of the potential impact. And Senteon takes that a step further to say, by meeting this setting, you're better mitigating this type of MITRE attack technique. You're meeting L2 3.313.111 in CMMC v2. And you can just kind of see how these settings map across other frameworks. So this is definitely something Senteon gives for free to everyone who attends the webinars and signs up. Very valuable resource. Again, all in an effort to spread the knowledge and availability of good security practices. Awesome. So now that I got my little spiel out of the way, let's dive into the settings.
Yeah.
So the first one we got here is going to be digitally signed communications to always. So Marty, if you can kick off and just explain what signing means, signing communication means, and then why we always want that to happen.
Sure. So digitally signing, it really goes back into the known client, knowing who you are, and also too, it's a way to protect from unknown threats. So the digitally assigning from Microsoft is basically, it allows the communication between the server and the workstation to where whenever the workstation connects to the server, it basically says, hey, this is who I am. And then if both are set to digitally sign, they're, I'll call it a GUI, or GUI, Global Unique Identifier, OID, an identifier to where the server knows who it's communicating with, and based upon it being a part of the domain. Domains are important with this, but that helps to keep unknown users from attacking. Going to an SMB share, if I just, for example, I put a Linux box or another Windows box that's not a part of the domain, and it wants to be digitally signed, then whenever I connect, the server's not going to know who I am. So it's going to say, oh, you know what, I'm not going to let you connect via SMB because you're not sending me a digitally signed certificate here to be able to see who you are.
And to keep this as high level as possible, this isn't extra steps on the user. They don't actually need to send a certificate or anything. This is just something that their computer will innately do when it's set up properly, right?
Correct. And of course, the rationale behind that is really session hijacking. Is what the rationale is behind this, is to, they being able to intercept a connection between a workstation and a server and be able to hijack that and send that traffic or modify that payload to where they want it to be. If you set up everything properly within Windows, enable everything's a part of the domain, and really just set up your environment in kind of the default manner. Once you enable this, everything should just work. And unless you're not a part of that domain or not a part of that environment, then of course it should thwart that attack.
Yeah, which if this isn't set up properly, I mean, this could cause potentially business disruption. If this isn't set up appropriately, it could be too secure for users who are employees actually just trying to do their job. Is that also possible?
It is. It really comes into play. The largest reason it comes into play is whenever somebody is remote and trying to access a share from across a VPN or across some type of access where it can't communicate with the domain controller properly, and it can't identify who it is. So that's where it can cause issues and disruption. But except for the most part,
it's pretty important, though.
Pretty important to have it on, and it should work. But it is something if you have a user that says, "Hey, I can't get to this SMB share," it just says, access is denied, but my username and password is correct. Start looking at the digital signing and start looking at a few of these other settings that could cause some disruption.
Yep, those error logs become very important if it is the right username and password. Sometimes I've heard the error message doesn't always define exactly what the issue is.
Especially when it just says unspecified error.
Yes, that's the most special, right?
Okay.
Awesome. So this next setting, similar, but let's go with digitally sign communications if server agrees. So this sounds a little bit like an overlap to me, but is this setting different?
It is. It gives the option to do if the server doesn't agree. So as it says there, if the server agrees that, hey, let's go ahead and digitally sign this. This gives a little bit more freedom in being able to have some of those machines that may not be a part of the domain, but still want to enable it. So it allows a little bit more freedom in that regards.
So that's very valuable for more of a hybrid or contractor work, maybe.
Hybrid contractor, again, remote sessions. People connecting to it by a machine setting at their house across a VPN. That's where it's going to help with this one. Having both enabled will, of course, you're enabling it on one, and then on if agrees, you're allowing it to where, okay, if they both agree and the server's happy, let it communicate. But then you're kind of putting that little emphasis on the server to kind of control that as well, to allow that more hybrid environment.
That makes perfect sense. All right. We'll get to this last setting already in Microsoft Network Client. Again, we'll be going over Microsoft Network Server as well, combine the two sections. So send unencrypted password to third-party SMB servers. So this is another one where I always like to call out the way Microsoft names their GPOs. Send unencrypted, disabled means they're not allowing you to do this. Always a little wordy. Be careful when you do configure your machines. But Marty, I feel like this is more of probably a legacy type of setting, but talk to us a little bit about this.
It is, but it can also have impacts to, well, like Samba. You guys have probably, a lot of people here probably heard of Samba and what it is. And it's for really a non-Microsoft servers. So people running Samba will typically have this enabled or not set, because not set is not enabled or disabled, for Samba servers to be able to connect to an SMB server Windows file share. So definitely set this. Now, what this will break, as it says here, is it has the potential, if you don't set up your Samba server properly, because Samba can support this. If you don't set up your non-Microsoft servers properly, it can leave where they can't get to the share. But all of that's explained in their documentation. Their implementation of SMB will support it, but it can be something that interrupts communication with non-Microsoft server SMB implementations.
Yep. All of this revolves around the accessibility and having that.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. Perfect to hear. So that sounds all good. Let's transition over to Microsoft Network Client. So again, transition over to Microsoft Network Server. A little different than Microsoft Network Client. So kind of restarting today, Marty. Could you kind of introduce the difference between the two? They have similar enough names. What's the difference between these, and do they relate to each other?
Oh, they relate to each other, but the server is really more the protections on the share itself as a holistic standpoint versus it being individual clients. They overlap a little, but they are a little differently and applied differently. One of them applies internally to the share itself. And the other one is external, clients connecting to it.
Yep. Perfect. So let's go back to that MITRE attacks. We did talk about most of these in the last one. Feel free to share any additional highlights you want to message, but we did add privilege escalation to this category as well.
Oh yes, good old privilege escalation and your whole UNC and things of that nature. So it same principle. It's if you're it's protecting the server itself. So this is where so if a server gets compromised, it's like, okay, how do we protect against the somebody getting a prompt, a UNC prompt, or even bypassing UNC, the UAC prompt there for user, the elevation. So these different settings have the effect on that to prevent that from happening on the server itself, and protect the server from being compromised. Again, that target of where the attacker is trying to get to.
And all of these settings that we're talking about ultimately is to really keep things preventative and taking a proactive stance to cybersecurity, right? Like an EDR, of course, is known to mitigate these threats as well. But what we're talking about here is very important to do alongside other cybersecurity solutions. Like you'd agree with all that?
It very much so. It is. And, an EDR, you're right. An EDR is there to protect a lot of this, but also too, you could have environments that you may not have your EDR on. Depending upon, again, your remote warriors. So let's say that somebody is trying to connect to a device that is a personally owned device, but they're needing to go to a file share of some type. These settings is where those would be protected, to where it's something that's completely separated. It's more on the share itself. And no, definitely are important to have both. And it's defense in depth versus defense in depth. Breadth and depth. People talk about, well, what's the difference? Depth is a layered approach. You have your EDR, you have Senteon, you have this, you have these settings, you have these settings. And then breadth is now let's go across. The breadth is how do we protect the client? How do we protect the server on top of the depth? So this is getting more into the defense in breadth settings versus the defense in depth settings.
Okay. I haven't actually heard that conversation. We may have to do a whole topic on that on another episode. So that is very good. All right, let's dive on into the settings. Go over to that first slide. So amount of idle time required before suspending session. I feel like this probably relates back to that persistence MITRE attack, making sure they can't sit on for too long. But talk to us a little bit about this. Why does CIS recommend 15 or fewer minutes? 15 honestly sounds a little high instinctively.
Sure. Well, this setting really what it's protecting against is protecting against, I'll call it just a DDoS attack, a
Yep.
denial of service. Uh, Instead of these sessions, instead of an attacker being able to continuously create sessions, and then staying active, which is consuming CPU resources, RAM resources, all of the different things that you know that are take up for each session, even though it's very small. You get 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 of those sessions, then it's going to bring the process, and that's where a lot of people don't think about is, well, I got a lot of CPU here. It's only running at 20%, or it's only running at this. Well, there's a lot of processes within Windows and within certain programs that are single threaded, for example. They only use one CPU. And SMB is actually one of those. SMB is now multi-threaded in of course Windows, but early implementations of Samba, just picking on Samba a little bit, used to be single threaded to where it would spawn a single process, a single CPU for all of the, for everything that SMB was doing. That's communications, that's sending data, receiving data. So, that would manifest itself in performance issues and different things. It's now multi-threaded and they have multi-threading capability, and that's been resolved. But something like this, a bad actor could come in here and they could say, okay, I'm going to send, 20,000 sessions, 20,000 SMB requests. And if you don't have the other things set to protect it, the Windows server will gladly go, okay, I'll establish a session for you. And then all of a sudden that single process is pegged at 100%. And now nobody can get to it. Well, once it's, there's a lot of exploits out there that you've seen that once something is set up to where it's getting ready to do a core dump, or it's running at 100%, you can then do other attacks to get around its protections, or you can crash the process. In the period of crashing the process, you can then create other vulnerabilities. So it's really it's not one attack that always does everything. It's a series of different types of things that puts a process or something in a state that it can now be exploited. And that's what this kind of protects against. Setting this setting to doing 15 minutes or fewer. If there's idle time, if I got a user and they're sitting here on their file share and they are not using it, well, then after 15 minutes, it disconnects that session. Still there, it'll reestablish when you go back, but at least now it's not an open session that is taking resources on the server.
I think that's a very key point. It's disconnecting the session,
Yes.
right? It's not
Correct.
Not just making the screen go black or anything.
No.
It's actually making it more secure and disconnecting it.
Correct.
And I mean that's spot on. I feel like you were really introducing a little bit at the high level the attack path, right?
Mm-hmm.
They may be on there and they may try to do other actions while this is sitting here, because why not, right? There's time for them to do other actions, take more steps, automated or not, because they already have that foothold.
Yeah, well, and that's something to look at it from a broader scope, not necessarily from a market standpoint, but just from a broader security scope. Every successful attack is not a single instance. It's not a single thing. That bad actor has probably been in your environment for a couple of months, or or longer, getting things ready and putting things in place for when they want to then execute and then do their attack. It's not just, oh, here I go, I'm going to try and I'm done. Yay, I got in there. No, it's preparation. I mean, they're just as smart as we are. That's why the field is as it is, and why we're having to put so much resources into protecting our assets and protecting everything, is because those bad actors are smart people. And
Absolutely.
We're smart people as well. But you get two smart people going at it, then somebody has to get clever. But it's really setting that up. It's getting everything ready to go, and then all of a sudden, you go from the different angles just to create that one opening that you're looking for. But that one opening was probably created by 15 different types of attacks.
It's a scary thought to really process for our listeners today. Let's get into the next setting. So a little familiar. So digitally signed communications to always, and a little preview as well. The next slide will also look a little familiar with signed communication if client agrees. So these are equivalent or companion settings to what we just spoke about. But could you, I guess, talk about at a high level, why do you need both? Do you need to do both? A little bit on that.
You do need both. Again, it goes back into and what they're attempting to protect. That one is from the client, one is from the from the local server standpoint. You need both enabled. You need to have them there, and you need to have that that signing again, so it knows who's talking to what. Because you have various services as well that are going to run. You got file manager services running on Windows that are all going to communicate with this. And of course, they're internal services, but SMB is also its own process. And so being able to have those on server processes also be designed, it protects it from something getting compromised. A process starts that's on the server and it wants to communicate. Of course, people say, well, I'll just go to the file directly. Well, you can, but then now you have to deal with other things. You got to deal with the MTFS permissions and these permissions for this. It depends on what your goal is. If your goal is from an SMB standpoint, you always want to go through the SMB protocol for it. So having these all need to be enabled to, again, that defense in depth, just multi-layered.
Yep, absolutely. And we could show the next slide really quick, but again, it is very, very similar to what we just talked about. Digitally signed communications if client agrees. Again, all of this is just mitigating the chance of a bad actor interrupting or hijacking a session, getting that foothold and not being noticed, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I won't make you talk towards this setting a third time, Marty.
Oh no, you're.
But
everything I was like, what else can I say new?
Yeah. I could try to put you on the spot, but you've shared quite the knowledge dump on these 4 setting combinations. So let's keep this going to a little bit of a different one. So next setting here with the disconnect clients when logon hours expire. Sounds a little bit similar to what we just talked about with disconnecting sessions, but what are logon hours? Is this something common that you've seen used?
It's getting more common.
Really?
I've used this setting for a long time. Even for years. I mean, even back in the Windows, like the server 2008 time frames, and 2012 for a long time. It really can do a lot to protect your environment from access, or not only that, it can also be a nice canary, a canary in a mine for compromised credentials. Because you have Zach here. Zach, his work hours from 8 to 5. Yep. When he signs in 8 to 5, it's going to work. But we know that Zach goes home at 5 o'clock. Well, if we see him attempt to log in, kind of go into the session, to the logon hours setting. If we see him trying to log in at 10 p.m., we know he doesn't work at 10 p.m. So that tells us that someone has gotten his credentials and are trying to log in. And so use that for a long time. I mean, it's something as simple, completely non-computer related, but even something like your credit report. One of the simplest things you can do to protect your credit report is lock your credit report. It's free. This is similar. You're kind of locking your credit report here. How can I log in with a credential that I have now stolen if I have prevented it from even happening after certain hours? So it's a very important setting. And going to the network server here, this allows, this, as the name implies, is okay. Well, you know what? At 5 o'clock, let's say that Zach forgets to log out, or let's say that he has a process on his computer that's running that has an SMB session. This client is logged out. You're logged out, even though your computer is locked. It still has that session open, but if it knows that, hey, this client, the logon hour stops at 5 o'clock, then I'm going to disconnect this session, because why keep it open? A, taking resources, and B, it creates just another pathway that can be hijacked and be intercepted to then ride across to get and compromise the server.
Yep. And 2 takeaways from that. One, I think bad actors are going to be targeting Zach, because every week I'm the example name, and it's just how it works. So
right. There's always a Zach.
Always is. There's always a Zach at every company. But no, let's talk a little bit more on this. You had mentioned, an IT getting an alert of, hey, he's on after that 5 p.m. He's never done this before. Could these settings we're talking about, I mean, any of these settings, this one specifically, be a good indicator of compromise? Kind of a heads up, like we should absolutely investigate this ASAP. Like, what would this mean if you saw if this was being enforced and you saw it changed or saw someone logged on?
Yeah, it absolutely is, Zach. I mean, and I'll kind of reference this now to like passwords. There's a huge pushback, and it's been there for years, type of deal, of password changes. Oh, I don't want to have to change my password every 90 days or every 120 days. And what do you mean I can't use the last 24 passwords? That's been 4 years ago. And of course, there's this trend going towards this section. What we recommend to people is we actually recommend to people that is to use passphrases. Easy to remember, making it longer. Of course, the CIS controls talk about complexity, and they also talk about length. So, whenever we say passphrases, even though the CIS controls are 14, I believe, 14 or 12, we put it minimum of like 24. And then we enforce complexity because we do want them to still use,
so you do it complexity on top of the extra
depending. It depends. We talk to the customer. Generally, doing 24. What we don't want to run into is this. We don't want to run into someone not using a space or punctuation, because what we explain to them is like, look, when you write out this phrase, write this phrase out exactly like you would type it out. Like I'm a big Muhammad Ali fan. The champ is here, right? Type it out, capital T, H-E, space, champ, space, blah, 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 period, or exclamation point. If we get, if the user, and sometimes trusting the user is not a good thing, if they won't do that, well, then we do enforce complexity requirements, because it's okay. Look, we want you to put it. That's the whole point of the passphrase, not just have a 24 character long something you just typed out. Because if you just type it out, that's just a dictionary word. Eventually, even the script kiddies and the automated tools will be able to do that. But it's those spaces and those punctuations that cause it to be extremely complex and extremely hard to crack. And so, you're talking about the login and passwords like that. So that we push that and we require that, because that does have an impact, and it does. From a logon. So back to your question about the logon hours. So yes, the logon hours can be a pain, but it definitely can be, because going back to the password resets, let's say that we tell somebody, hey, don't worry about resetting your password. We're actually going to make it to where your password expires once a year. That's it. Because let's look at an indication of compromise. If nothing ever happens and nothing ever gets compromised with your username and password, then is your username and password compromised? You don't know, so you can take the error of caution and go, okay, well, we're going to require you to change it anyway because we don't know. Or we can go, okay, well, nothing, you're fine. There's no indication that you have a compromised credential. Why would you say, okay, go change your password when there's no real reason to? So it goes hand in hand. So it definitely is, because if we see somebody logging in during a time frame that we know that they're not working, we know that they're not here, there's a process that follows it too. Let's say, for example, we see a logon attempt by, picking on you again, Zach, we see a logon attempt by Zach at 10 p.m. Well, we're not just going to, the first thing we're going to do, we can do one of two things, and it depends on how ultra cautious you want to be. The first thing we might have is a process, an automated process that says if it sees this username log in, and they get this particular event viewer error, which is saying, hey, logon hours expired, immediately reset their password and require them, or not to reset their password, immediately disable their account and send an alert. That's the most draconian way, right? The other way is, okay, we see that, we get an alert, then we, the next business day, hey, Zach, we see you tried to log in at 10 o'clock last night. Was that you? And you may go, oh, you know what? It was. I was trying to do this. Okay, well, do you need access after hours? I do. And it all boils back down to control. That's what it all boils back down to. And it's not control, and I'll say security and ease of use are kind of mutually exclusive these days. It's less so now than it was years ago. Before it was 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Now it's more security and ease of use. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 1. Because tools are getting easier, people are getting smarter. But no, so it definitely is. It can be an indication of a potential compromise, of a credential compromise.
Yeah. And if Zach did log on at 10, that would not be too different, because Zach in this scenario is an entrepreneur who has no general working hours.
Right. Well, in that case for that user, if you did say, hey, well then, okay, great. We now know you need to be on. So we'll change those hours to where you can log in. And then we modify our process based upon the workflow that we have to watch for a user.
Yep, spot on. About creating those exceptions and creating those tailored baselines, it sounds like. I mean, before Senteon, really, the general consensus of what we understood MSPs were doing is they would take a template of all of these CIS benchmarks, whether it's just L1 or just IG1, whatever that is, and they just apply all, see what breaks, react to it, and not really think twice about it. What Senteon's really on a mission to change is, yes, we want to prioritize the implementation of these CIS benchmarks, but we also want to be able to say, hey, these are the ones that could be disruptive. Hey, this is the context on why we believe it will be disruptive. So absolutely spot on. Love the conversation. And we got, go ahead. You got more?
I don't want, I know we don't, I know how much time we have, another 10, 15 minutes, about 20 minutes left, but
plenty of time.
I just want to say that, on that note too, when you look at security and you look at users, it's a game, it's a dance is what it is. And at the end of the day, we can be as strict as possible. I mean, we can make it to where, oh, that thing is never getting compromised. But if you can't do your job, then it doesn't matter. So
tell me, if you unplug all the machines, you're not doing your job as an MSP? If you just unplug all of it?
If I unplug all the machines, I can guarantee you they're safe. They're safe, but then you can't do your job. So it's that dance between, being secure and protecting everything, and then still allowing the user to be able to do their job. That's where that's an ever, it's an ever changing landscape, as needs go. But yeah, so that's where security gets fun, is finding that balance between work and security.
Yep. And we do have one more setting to cover, and then we'll get into some of the Q&A. If there are live questions, feel free to toss those in the LinkedIn comments. Otherwise, we have some kind of prepped up. So let's get into this last setting. So server SPN target name validation level. This sounds like it's doing something more with ensuring it is who they say it is, but CIS recommends to accept if provided by client or higher member server only.
Yep. So SPN, the good old service principal name. SMB uses an SPN when it, an SPN is provided by a client. And in essence, an SPN is a unique identifier to that client. And whenever it goes to connect to the server using SMB, that is presented to it. And so the client knows, like you're talking about, who it is. And of course, that gets into the old style implementation, or NTLM v1, v2.
Yep.
And so
that's next week.
That's next week. Oh yes, get on NT Land Manager. I think that's what.
That's either next week or the one following. But you're doing some foreshadowing for us.
Oh, hey, there you go. It's completely unexpected, but hey, good job. But yeah, the SPN name validation is it validates that SPN that was provided by the client, allowing it to establish a session. And if it doesn't match, then it just denies the user. So it goes back to being a part of a domain and being the domain knowing who this client is, because if it doesn't know who this client is, then it's going to say, hey, I don't know who you are. And so it's just another layer going into the defense in depth. It's just another layer to protect the server from unknown clients.
Yep. Spot on. I mean, all these settings, again, it's making sure you are who you say you are. This is the preventative, proactive layer of security in that defense in depth. So absolutely. All right, let's get into some of the more fun questions. The first one, so we talked about this a little bit, but when you configure these settings that we talked about in a hybrid or multi-domain, I mean, we talked about remote, contractor. I mean, how disruptive or how important is it to have maybe separate baselines or tailored groups? I mean, is all of that pretty reasonable when asked this first question?
They are. And in this first question, what that first question brings to mind to me about hybrids and multi-domain setups is, actually be more of a second. Definitely have different ones because some users have different requirements than others. As a quick example, we have an MSP client in Cincinnati that we work very, very closely with that we actually implemented Senteon with. And we had a test group of 10 users. And and of course, we just follow what our default is just to follow the CIS guidelines to the T at first, and then kind of let it flow out from there. Depending, we had a few people that we're still investigating. It just happened earlier this week that for some strange reason on their machines they use a particular software for cameras, for their security cameras. And some of these CIS controls, it wasn't Senteon that caused it. Senteon just putting the controls in that we told it to. Some of these CIS controls and some of these things that we changed caused it to where the camera software just had a black screen. They couldn't see anything. And then it also on those two, it was 2 machines, I think, out of a test group of 10. It had, it would continuously pop up on that user's computer. Windows needs your current credentials. Can you hit Control-Delete, put your current credentials in, and log in? And it was just on those 2 machines. Everybody else was fine. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to, we reset everything back so they can continue to work. Going back to, well, you got to be able to work. We reset those, and now we're going to go through and find out which setting caused that, and then create a completely different template that is going to be applied to those machines. So, unfortunately, not one size doesn't fit all. And so you need to test this. You need to, and that kind of goes to the second point there.
Yep.
You're going to have 2 different. You're very, it's not of, hey, will we? It's no. You will have multiple templates for hybrid environments. Not even hybrid environments, for even a single environment. You could have some machines that have this template and some machines that have this template.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to understand what those 2 machines had different than the other 10. And out of curiosity, as we're live on the air, did you go through and review the evaluation data? Is there maybe something Senteon picked up or something
No,
that
they
to
all
add
looked
to our
the same.
solution?
Everything looked the same. Everything looked
the same.
Yep, everything looked the same. We did the evaluation and looked at everything. Everything was no differences. They're all just a member of the domain.
Yeah.
Like any other one. And, of course, Senteon showed everything looked hunky-dory, and then we applied it. But these applications, we're thinking it's something with these applications specifically. And that's what we just have to find out which particular setting is interfering with these applications. And first and foremost, find out from the application vendor, hey, we're running into this. Do you have an update? Are we behind 15 revisions? And that's why this doesn't work. And then, we could just, maybe we just update it to the newest version of this particular software, reapply it, and everything's fine. But yep.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely can happen. And that's something we definitely want to improve and make available resources as well. We want to have a little, I guess, FAQ, or something along the lines, say, if you have these applications, be extremely wary of these settings, because we do want to build that mapping database so that we can always continue to provide these settings and make it as least as disruptive as possible. We want to provide as much context. So that's
100%.
an awesome story.
Yeah. Well, change is always disruptive. I mean, kind of going into number 2, I guess I'll take us into number 2 here. Change is always disruptive. And so on number 2 here, what I'll say to this, you've heard of, if you're in a retail brick and mortar store, you've heard the old saying, location, 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 right? This one, I say lab. Put before you make changes, with Senteon, with SentinelOne, with any of the things that you use to protect your customers and your clients, lab it up first. Make sure it works. Find the bugs. This one right here. I will say, we labbed it up. Everything worked, but everything looked okay. But we didn't have that specific software, obviously, because it's like, oh yeah, that should be fine. But yeah, lab this up, make it, create, we even go as far as, depending upon the environment, to completely clone their environment. I mean, we will take, images of their servers, images of their workstations, and we will virtually create their environment virtually. So it is everything, and just, keep it separated to where it can't go anywhere. Sure. And run software to make sure that, okay, we're not going to run into this, we're not going to run into that. So yeah, the biggest thing you can do for any of these settings we talked about today, or any settings, is lab and testing before you put it on your customers. And then even when you do that, even when you do lab it and test it up, like for example, this particular customer that we rolled out 10, they have over 500 desktops. Imagine pushing that to 500 desktops at once and going, okay, I'm good to go.
Be pretty brave.
Yes, you're special kind of stupid.
Special kind of brave.
Special kind of brave. That's just, do them in slots, 10, 15, 20. Great. 10, 15, 20, because it goes back to the size of the MSP. You got the MSP I'm working with, to give you an example, they have a number of clients that are 400 or 500 workstations, but they only have 6 employees, 7 employees, which is definitely easy to do with the tools we have at our disposal. You can have a small crew be able to manage large environments. But if you do something, brave like that, And now all of a sudden the phone is ringing with 500 people saying, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, then those 7 people are just be like, I'm done. I can't do this now.
Yeah.
Just, and so it definitely, it's testing, it's lab, and then it's a rollout process to roll it out in as many as you think you can handle. Of course, you let's say handle, you always have to expect somebody's going to be like, well, I'm getting this.
Yep.
It happens,
Absolutely. So we're right at time, but I do want to ask just this last question, if you can just give like a 60-second response on it. But after you implement these configurations, I hear stories all the time. Drift happens, unapproved changes. Applications can change settings to force themselves to allow them to work. And have you experienced configuration drift? Is it a real thing that I talk about every week? And then how do you manage this and make sure that the settings you place actually stay in place?
Oh no, 100% drift is real. The cake's not a lie in this. Drift happens. GPOs. I'll really easily. You have an environment. The traditional way of modifying these settings is via GPO. So if you're trying to make these settings, with another tool, and I'm going to make it, ambiguous with another tool, but then you have a GPO over here that's changing it to something different, they're just going to be fighting each other. And so no, drift is real. It happens. And that's just where the planning comes in, planning the implementation of that tool, and to know that you don't have anything that is going to contradict that tool or make changes to what that tool is trying to do.
Yeah, spot on. All right, let's wrap up. Thank you for coming on the show today, Marty. I'll definitely have you back. Join us when Rich is back from his sailing trip as well. So appreciate that. We are here every single week on LinkedIn Live. We will be posting the recordings to YouTube. If you can highlight the slide, moderator. We will be posting these to YouTube. We are going to be posting up an email version of the newsletter as well, but we do have the one on LinkedIn available for you. So that will be coming out. Next week, we'll be talking about network access with Dan Lee, and then network security with Dominic Vogel. I think that's when we're getting into the NTLM and SMB protocols. But yeah, wrap up in next steps. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Always happy to answer questions after the show. Be a helpful friend to the community. And if you do want to do gap assessments with Senteon or anything else, go to the next slide. You can scan that barcode and test that out there. So appreciate everyone joining us and being on for the show, and we will see you next week.
All right. Thank you for having me on.